What if your next run ended in a place where time seems to stand still, and every shadow holds a secret you'd rather not discover? Imagine being alone in the wee hours of the morning, cruising along forgotten stretches of the legendary Route 66, with the rain beating down on your windshield, and your GPS insisting on taking you to a spot on the map that seems isolated from everything. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that even when you can't see anyone, there are eyes watching your every move. That night I'd been behind the wheel for hours. Rides were scarce. The inclement weather kept passengers away, and the road seemed like an endless corridor of silence and distant streetlights. When the app alert rang, I didn't think twice. It was a client waiting for me at a cheap motel, one of those roadside ones you find at interstate exits, with flashing signs and walls that look like they've seen more than their fair share. What you're about to discover may surprise you. The name of the place sounded familiar, but not in a good way. I remembered conversations with other drivers about that motel, stories of fights, disappearances, and events no one could quite explain. And yet, there I was, driving down the wet road, the wind whistling through the cracks in the car, creating a soundtrack that only heightened the discomfort. Stay with me until the end, because what started as a simple ride turned into something that still keeps me awake at night. With every kilometer, the city lights grew more distant, replaced by old signs and lonely neon signs. I passed a closed gas station with rusty pumps and boarded-up windows. The smell of wet asphalt filled the car, and a thin mist began to spread across the road, making the road ahead almost invisible. The GPS said I had only a few minutes left, but I felt like I was slipping further and further away from reality. When I finally spotted the motel's blinking sign, something inside me wavered. The burned letters formed. Only part of the name and the flickering light gave the place an air of abandonment. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for an old car parked in the corner, covered in leaves and dust, as if no one had moved it in years. Have you ever been in a place that felt wrong from the first moment? I got out of the car, feeling the cold biting into my skin. The sound of rain on the metal roof echoed across the courtyard, and each footstep on the gravel seemed louder than it should have been. At the reception door, a lone lamp struggled to stay lit. I looked around and noticed that despite it being the middle of the night, the curtains in some rooms moved slightly, as if someone were spying. The attendant suddenly appeared from a dark hallway, his expression unreadable. He handed me the key and simply said, "Room 12, end of the hall." No explanation, no questions about the guest, just that quick, almost suspicious look. As I held the cold key in my hand, I realized the feeling of being watched was growing more intense. There was no laughter, voices, or TV sounds from the other rooms, just the distant patter of rain and the wind rushing through the cracks. And as I approached the hallway, the air seemed to grow heavier, as if each step took me a little further from the safety of the entrance. Now I want to go even deeper into this story, because what awaited me behind that door forever changed the way I see the road and the people who cross my path. As I walked down the narrow hallway, the yellowish light from the fluorescent bulbs flickered in a rhythm that almost seemed to match my steps. The damp carpet sagged slightly beneath my feet, and each door I passed bore a worn number, as if decades of strange history had already unfolded there. I couldn't ignore the chill on the back of my neck, that instinctive feeling that something was out of place. And it's precisely in these moments, when the silence is almost deafening and the tension seems to boil over, that I think about how important it is to hear other voices. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you've experienced something similar, or if you simply felt that uneasy feeling in your stomach as I described this path to the bedroom, leave your thoughts in the comments below. It's through these exchanges that we realize we're not alone in our experiences, and each story you share helps build a community of people who enjoy this atmosphere as much as you do. And since we're on this journey together, please take the opportunity to like the video. It may seem small, but each like is like a light in this hallway. It illuminates the path and helps this content reach more people who are also interested in these stories. And if you want to continue following each new story, subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll ensure you don't miss any details of the future stories we'll explore. The air grew thicker as I finally reached door 12. The wood seemed to absorb the light around it, and for a moment I thought I heard a muffled sound coming from inside. I took a deep breath and my hand trembled slightly as I fitted the key into the lock. My name is Daniel Harris. I'm 38 years old and have spent a good portion of my life behind the wheel. I work as a ride-hailing driver in Oklahoma City, but my route almost always takes me far beyond the city limits. The interstates have become a kind of second home for me, places where time seems to flow differently, where days and nights blend together, and the stories I carry don't fit in a single book. My routine is simple. I start early, sometimes even before sunrise, and finish late at night, with the constant hum of the engine and the smell of stale coffee keeping me awake. However, there's a curious detail about my work. I rarely accept rides to cheap roadside motels. It's not prejudice against the type of client, but an instinct I've acquired over the years. These places, often along Route 66 or tucked away on back roads, feel different. It's not just the worn appearance of the facade or the uneven lighting in the parking lot. It's the atmosphere, a heaviness in the air, as if each wall held fragments of stories no one should hear. Whenever the app notification shows such a destination, I hesitate before accepting or declining. It's a quick decision, but one fraught with memories, recollections of uncomfortable situations, awkward encounters, clients who disappeared without a word. Most of the time, I follow my instincts and choose more predictable routes. But that night, something made me break the pattern. It was a Friday around 11:40 p.m. I was already thinking about calling it a day when the ride appeared. A vague address near exit 214 on I-40, bearing the name of a motel I'd never seen before. Sunset Rest Inn. The name seemed inoffensive, almost welcoming. The rate wasn't high, but the location piqued my curiosity. It wasn't listed on any of the standard hotel maps. I accepted the ride, remember feeling a slight flutter in my stomach as I adjusted the GPS. The pickup point was in an older residential neighborhood with narrow, poorly lit streets. I stopped in front of a worn brick house with a flickering streetlight right in front. The passenger wasn't on the sidewalk. I waited a few minutes watching the house's windows until a man appeared. He wore a dark overcoat, collar up, and carried a leather suitcase. He didn't say a word as he got into the car. He just nodded and settled into the back seat. The silence was absolute the entire trip. In the rearview mirror, I could only see the pale reflection of his face, slightly turned toward the window, as if observing something I couldn't see. There was no music, just the sound of tires gliding over the wet asphalt. At one point, curiosity made me break the silence. I asked if he was traveling for work or pleasure. The answer came dryly, almost in a whisper. "I just need a place to stay for the night." As we approached our destination, I noticed the motel was set back from the main road. Its facade was illuminated by a red neon sign, blinking irregularly. The parking lot, with few cars, seemed even emptier because of the fog that was beginning to roll in. I pulled over near the reception desk and he asked me to wait for him. Just a minute. He got out, walked to the counter, and exchanged a few words with the attendant, a short man in a worn hat who seemed more interested in observing than speaking. Minutes later, the passenger returned, thanked me for the ride, and paid me in cash even though the app had already debited the amount. "For the trouble," he said, and disappeared through the side door to the hallway leading to the rooms. I was about to start the car when I noticed something strange. Through a gap in the curtains of room 12's window, I saw a quick movement, as if someone were standing, watching from inside. It wasn't my passenger. The figure had a rigid, almost motionless posture, and something about the way it held itself made me feel there was more to this night than I was willing to face. The ride appeared on my phone almost abruptly, as if fate itself had pushed me to the top of the list. The notification sound broke the silence inside the car, and when I glanced at the screen, something made me frown. The pickup point was in an area I rarely traveled, a narrow street, lost among vacant lots and abandoned warehouses. On the map, there wasn't much around, just the winding path of smaller roads connecting to old Route 66. The name of the destination jumped out at me: Redwood Motel. Anyone who drives at night and knows this area knows this place isn't exactly a tourist draw. It was one of those cheap motels, known not for its comforts but for the stories that circulate between drivers and locals. Whispered conversations in roadside diners, tales of guests who vanished without a trace, and attendants who changed shifts with a heavy look in their eyes, as if carrying a secret they'd rather never hear. As I considered whether or not to accept the ride, I realized the weather outside wasn't helping. A light drizzle had been falling for hours, enough to leave the asphalt slippery and the windshield covered in a patchy veil of droplets. The fog was beginning to form in dense layers, creating the kind of scenario where vision is reduced and every distant light seems like a ghostly beacon blinking in the darkness. It was the perfect combination of factors: that any experienced driver recognizes as a warning to avoid surprises. But somehow the call seemed to carry more than just a ride to a rundown motel. It was as if there was a hidden narrative behind the request, a specific address, sent by someone who needed to be there and only there at that time of night. The app indicated the passenger was 12 minutes away. There was no profile picture, and his rating was invisible, as if it were his first time using the service. This, for me, already set off a red flag. Still, I accepted. Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because of that strange feeling that certain journeys aren't chosen, but imposed. The GPS guided me down streets I barely remembered existed, past old factories and warehouses with rusted signs. In some stretches, the cell phone signal failed, leaving only the frozen blue line on the screen and the sound of the engine for company. As I approached the pickup point, I realized the exact location wasn't a typical house or building. It was a corner with no sidewalk, surrounded by tall weeds and a leaning streetlight that barely illuminated the ground. I stopped, looking around, trying to identify the passenger. Nothing. The clock on the dashboard read 11:58 p.m. when, from somewhere in the shadows, I heard the muffled sound of footsteps on gravel. He emerged from the shadows as if he'd been watching me even before I arrived. Tall, thin, he wore a worn brown jacket and held a small envelope in his hand. He didn't seem drunk, but there was something in his gaze, steady, direct, that conveyed urgency and a strange lack of emotion. He got into the car without a word, just closed the door and slowly fastened his seatbelt. When I confirmed my destination, his voice finally emerged, low, almost hoarse. Room 6. That caught me off guard. The app doesn't show a room number, just the address. Why did he already know? And why was he telling me this? As if it were relevant to me. I pretended not to notice, just drove on. The road to the motel was a corridor of silence. The windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm, the headlights piercing the curtain of fog. There were no other cars, no music, just the sound of the engine and the controlled breathing of the passenger in the back seat. When I finally saw the illuminated sign for the Redwood Motel, I noticed it was flashing an almost sickly red, like blood reflected off metal. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the air there felt colder than the road, as if the space were isolated not just physically but somehow from time itself. As I pulled up to the reception desk, I noticed there was no one at the desk. The man opened the door, looked at me for a second, as if trying to record my face, and walked to the side entrance without even passing by. I remained in the car watching, and it was at that moment that I noticed a figure moving behind one of the closed curtains on the ground floor. A low figure, motionless for a few seconds, before disappearing into the darkness of the room. The air grew heavier. Something told me this race was far from just a delivery to a grim destination. It was as if I'd crossed an invisible border, where every detail carried a meaning not yet ready to be revealed. The road to the motel seemed to stretch longer than it should, as if every curve and every meter of asphalt were being stretched by something invisible. The rain, which had previously been just a persistent drizzle, now fell in thicker, sheets drumming on the roof of the car and forming small waves in the puddles that had accumulated on the shoulder. My headlights reflected off the wet asphalt, as if I were driving on a broken mirror, with fragments of light scattering in every direction. To my left, a sparse row of trees cast shadows cut by the dim light of rusty streetlights. To my right, expanses of vacant land receded into darkness, interrupted only by the fleeting glow of distant signs, advertising gas stations, auto repair, shops and roadside bars that looked more closed than open. The letters on some of these signs flickered, blinking as if trying to communicate something in an ancient code only a select few could decipher. The distant sound of trucks cruising along the main highway was muffled, like echoes of a world that kept moving as I drove deeper and deeper into a place that seemed forgotten in time. There was something about this isolation that made me question whether I really wanted to continue to the end of the race. It was as if the car was being guided not by GPS, but by a force pushing me into a scenario I hadn't chosen to be a part of. The windshield wipers moved in an almost hypnotic rhythm, cutting through the water and revealing brief glimpses of the road ahead. The smell of wet earth permeated the car through the small cracks in the windows, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline that always seemed to linger in the air during rainy nights on the highway. The passenger behind me remained motionless, an almost silent presence that blended into the seat he was sitting in. It was when we passed the first sign indicating the motel's proximity that I realized how isolated the place was. The sign, illuminated by yellowed lights, featured worn letters and a pattern of pine trees that looked like hastily scratched-in scrapes. The arrow pointed to a narrow, poorly paved side road, where fog gathered as if guarding the entrance to something that preferred to remain hidden. Driving along that stretch was like entering another world. The highway lights disappeared behind us, and the only sound, besides the rain, was the engines echoing off the trees leaning over the road. The canopies formed a natural tunnel, further blocking what little light remained. In some places, the weeds crept onto the asphalt, as if nature itself were trying to reclaim that forgotten path. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I spotted the Redwood Motel sign. It flickered, erratically, casting a deep red light against the peeling walls and low roof. It was a single-story building with a row of doors and small windows, each with closed curtains. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for 2 old cars, both covered in a thin layer of dust, as if they hadn't been moved in weeks. The sound of rain hitting the hood mingled with the distant rumble of a truck speeding down the highway, now almost out of my sight. That contrast, the world outside continuing its flow, while I found myself stuck in this forgotten spot, gave me the strange sensation of being in a transition zone, a space where normal rules seemed suspended. I parked the car near the side entrance, and the passenger got out without saying goodbye, walking toward the room with firm, silent steps. The lights in the covered hallway cast shadows that moved as if independent of any body. I remained in the car for a few seconds, observing the scene, feeling that the rain, cold, and solitude were creating not only the perfect setting for something unexpected, but also for a revelation I wasn't yet ready to face. As soon as I got out of the car, the icy rain fell on my shoulders, seeping through the fabric of my jacket, as if to remind me there was no turning back. The sound of the drops hitting the metal awning over the side entrance echoed in an irregular rhythm, as if even nature itself were out of step. I walked to the reception area, following a narrow hallway with walls painted a yellowish beige, already stained by time and humidity. The carpet beneath my feet was so worn that in some spots I could see the rough base where the fibers had disappeared. As I pushed open the glass door, a small bell rang, producing a metallic sound that lasted longer than it should have, reverberating in the nearly silent room. The lighting was dim, emitted by a single bulb hanging above the counter, surrounded by a yellowish plastic screen that filtered the light, giving it a sickly hue. The air inside had an unmistakable smell of mildew mixed with something undefined, perhaps cheap disinfectant, perhaps the remnants of old smoke that time had failed to dissipate. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man sat, leafing through an old magazine with crumpled pages. He seemed so oblivious to my presence that for a moment I wondered if I'd become invisible. His glasses were slid down the bridge of his nose, and he pushed them back up with a slow, almost automatic movement, never really taking his eyes off what he was reading. When he finally looked up, his eyes had the expression of someone who didn't expect to see anyone. Not there, not at this time of night. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice thick with disinterest, as if each word were an effort. I looked around. The wooden counter was deeply etched, as if years of elbows and heavy objects had left scars on the surface. Behind it, a shelf displayed keys hanging on hooks, each with a colorful plastic keychain, numbered in an almost childish way. Most looked as if they hadn't been used in a long time. The phone in the corner was covered in a fine layer of dust, which made me wonder how many calls actually came from there. "A room," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. The attendant took a few seconds to get up, as if every movement needed to be negotiated with his own body. As I searched for the right key, I noticed something. Some spaces on the shelf where the keys should be were empty, but there was no sign of guest in the parking lot. It was as if the keys had disappeared for other reasons. He placed a red keychain on the counter, and his fingers brushed mine for a brief moment. They were cold, almost damp. I couldn't tell if it was sweat, rainwater, or something I'd rather not imagine. "Room 7, he said, sitting down again. "It's at the end of the hall." There was something odd about the way he said those words. It wasn't just tiredness. There was a subtle pause before the number, as if he were reconsidering whether he should actually give it to me. I grabbed the key and headed toward the bedroom, crossing more patches of worn carpet that sagged under my footsteps. With each step, the musty smell intensified, mingling with other scents: damp wood, rust, and that cheap perfume that seemed to have been oversprayed sometime in the distant past. The walls, covered in faded floral wallpaper, were peeling at the edges, revealing dark stains beneath. There was something about the atmosphere of that hallway that made me feel watched even when no one was around. The sound of rain on the roof was now muffled, replaced by the occasional creak of wood and the low hum of an ancient refrigerator coming from somewhere behind the walls. When I reached the bedroom door, I hesitated for a few seconds before inserting the key into the lock. It was as if, instinctively, my body was trying to stop me from crossing that threshold. But curiosity, or perhaps a darker kind of impulse, took over. The attendant held my gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, as if measuring every gesture, every breath. The distant sound of the rain seemed to melt away inside, and the room was so quiet that the sound of the key being removed from the hook echoed like a muffled bell. He extended his hand slowly, and I noticed his gaze didn't follow the movement. It was as if he were following a script he already knew by heart, without any genuine interest. "Room 12, end of the hall," he said, without tilting his head, without smiling, without asking anything. The lack of curiosity was what bothered me. There was no typical, "How many nights?" or "Are you alone?" Just the mechanical handing of a piece of metal attached to a worn green plastic keychain. His fingers touched mine, and again I felt that abnormal temperature, cold and damp, as if I'd just dipped my hand in stagnant water. I gripped the key tightly and stepped away from the counter, realizing his eyes were still following me. Even after I turned my back, it sent a sudden chill down the back of my neck. I passed through the glass door that led to the inner hallway, and the air there had a different density. It was heavier, as if the atmosphere were charged with something other than humidity. The hallway stretched out before me like a narrow tunnel, lit by fluorescent lights that flickered at irregular intervals. The faded, carpeted floor creaked beneath my footsteps, and the sound reverberated, as if the narrow walls were returning every sound with a muffled echo. The doors to the left and right were aligned, each with a metal number affixed crookedly, as if they had never been properly adjusted. As I walked, I noticed there was no sound coming from the rooms. No televisions on, no murmurs, no plumbing. It was as if the entire place were suspended in time, waiting for something undefined. This complete absence of life was unsettling, especially when combined with that smell, a mix of mold, old wood, and something faintly sweet I couldn't quite identify. The air was colder there than in the lobby, and each step brought me closer to the end of the hallway, where the farthest lamp seemed to struggle to stay lit. As I walked, my body reacted with an involuntary tension, as if every muscle was bracing for something my mind couldn't yet name. I passed doors with scratch marks near the handles, as if someone had tried to enter or exit in a hurry. When I finally spotted number 12, I noticed its door was different from the others. The paint was darker, as if it had been recently repainted, and the doorknob glowed subtly under the flickering light. There was also a detail that caught my attention, a faint, circular mark on the floor, right in front of the door, as if something heavy had recently been dragged away. I gripped the key tighter, hesitating before inserting it into the lock. The silence around me had become almost physical, as if it were pressing against my ears from within, and it was at that moment that I realized something even more unsettling. Since I'd picked up the key, I hadn't heard another sound from the reception desk. Not the flicking of pages, not the scraping of chairs, nothing. It was as if the clerk had disappeared as soon as I turned around. I took a deep breath and placed the key against the cold metal of the lock. The click, as I turned it, echoed through the hallway, shattering the stillness of the air. I felt as if I were about to cross an invisible line, a threshold that, once crossed, would allow no return. For a moment, my reflection in the narrow mirror beside the door seemed distorted, as if the dim light were framing my face incorrectly. I pushed the door open slowly, and the creak of the hinges was almost a scream in the silence. The interior was dim, with only a sliver of light coming from a window barely covered by a heavy curtain. The air inside was even colder, and the sweet smell intensified, mixed with something metallic that made my stomach churn. With each step I took inside, I felt the weight of the atmosphere compress around me. The shadows seemed to lengthen, eerily outlining the furniture, as if they didn't obey the light source. The bed was made, but the sheets had a deep crease, as if someone had lain there not long ago. On the bedside table sat a glass half filled with cloudy water and a small sheaf of yellowed papers that looked like they'd been handled many times. I approached, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling of being watched. As I touched the papers, I noticed my hands trembling slightly. They were cold, almost clammy, as if they'd been left near something cold. The handwriting was uneven and hurried, and though I couldn't immediately make out the contents, a scrawled phrase stood out at the top: "Don't leave the door open." The sudden sound of something banging in the hallway made me turn quickly, but when I looked, the door was closed behind me, and there was nothing there, except that somehow the light in the hallway had completely gone out. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because what happened in the next few moments doesn't resemble anything that logic can explain. The hallway ahead seemed to stretch longer than the physical space should allow. The narrow walls, covered in beige wallpaper already yellowed with age, created a claustrophobic sensation, as if each step pushed me deeper into an invisible funnel. The lights above flickered, but not predictably. They were bursts of brightness and shadow, as if the electrical system itself were trying to confuse me, alternating my vision between what should be there and what might just be in my head. There was a constant, almost imperceptible sound coming from somewhere in the distance, a low hum, interspersed with dry creaks like old wood shifting under weight. But what really slowed me down was the sound of footsteps. They weren't my own. They were slow, shuffling, with an uneven cadence, and the echo, mixed with my own, making it difficult to tell where they were coming from. For a moment I thought they were just reflections of my movement, but I realized they continued even when I stopped. The smell in the air was the first sign that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the mildew or dampness you'd expect from such an enclosed space. There was a heavier aroma, sweet and yet acidic, like overripe fruit mixed with rusty iron. The kind of smell that, even without seeing its source, makes your body react with revulsion. I breathed more subduedly, trying to keep it from filling my lungs, but it seemed like each breath also drew an invisible tension into me. The texture of the carpet beneath my feet, uneven and bumpy, gave me the sensation that something was just beneath the surface, and each light bulb I passed seemed to have its own sound. Some buzzed as if on the verge of bursting, others crackled, and one or two emitted a low hiss, almost like a constant whisper. I was surrounded not just by walls and ceiling, but by a dissonant orchestra of noises that combined to keep me alert. Suddenly, one of the doors to my left shook slightly, as if someone had pushed from inside. It wasn't strong enough to be a punch, but enough for the doorknob to wobble slightly and then spring back into place. Instinct made me stop, but at the same time, I realized that standing still in that hallway seemed riskier than continuing. I walked on, not looking directly at the door, but feeling its presence nearby, like an invisible eye following me. Every few feet, there were small cracks in the ceiling, and from them hung barely discernible strands of dust and cobwebs, swaying gently as if an imperceptible air circulated there, but there was no wind, and it was at that point that I realized the sound of the strange footsteps had ceased. The silence that followed wasn't a relief. It was a pause before something greater. It was the kind of emptiness that seems to fill with anticipation, as if the space itself were waiting for my next decision. The hallway had a slight unevenness in the floor, and this caused the last lamp ahead to cast my shadow in a distorted way, elongating my arms and legs like unreal figures. And then, amidst this play of light and shadow, I saw something that made my heart race. For a brief instant, another shadow appeared beside mine. It wasn't perfectly aligned with my posture and disappeared as soon as the light flickered. My body reacted before my mind. I quickened my pace, feeling the weight of the key in my pocket as if it were my only guarantee that I was there for a legitimate reason. But the further I went, the more the sweet smell intensified, until it became impossible to ignore. It was the perfect blend of something organic and decaying, with a metallic undertone that could only mean one thing. The sound returned, but now it wasn't footsteps. It was scratching, very light, coming from somewhere ahead, like fingernails, scraping against wood or fabric. There was no rush to these movements, and that was what made them worse. It was as if whoever, or whatever, was there knew exactly how much time they had. At that moment I realized that every detail of that hallway seemed calculated to distance me from logic. It was as if I were entering a hidden backstage area of a place that, from the outside, seemed banal, but inside revealed a hidden, almost forbidden truth. Part of me wanted to stop, back away, walk out the door and forget that address forever. But another part, the one driven by a need to understand, to decipher what was happening, pushed me forward. That's when the light closest to me blinked 3 times in succession, and then went out completely, leaving only the dim light of the more distant lamps. The scratching stopped, and in its place came a low sound, almost a sigh. Not a normal sigh, but something heavier, heavy, as if it were the last breath of someone who shouldn't be there anymore. My muscles were stiff, but curiosity, or perhaps stubbornness, made me take 2 more steps. The hallway seemed narrower now, the walls nearly touching my shoulders. It was as if the building itself were leaning, pushing me forward. I felt a chill run up my spine, not just from the chill of the air, but from the physical sensation that something was following my movements, adjusting to the same rhythm, but just out of my field of vision. And then suddenly, a dull sound came from behind, the door I'd passed minutes before closing on its own. The echo spread through the hallway and quickly faded, as if the space were sucking the sound into itself. It was impossible to know if it was a coincidence, but the way silence returned soon afterward assured me that nothing there happened by chance. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what was about to happen was going to completely redefine what it meant to be alone in that hallway. Comment there. That makes sense to me. When I finally reached the designated door, the first thing that struck me was that it wasn't locked. The handle, worn and cold, gave way under the pressure of my fingers before I could even apply any real force. It didn't make sense. In a place like this, doors should always be locked, especially at night. The space between the door and the frame let in a faint sliver of light, flickering as if filtered through a poorly drawn curtain. But it wasn't just the light that was escaping. A low, constant sound spread through the hallway, a sort of irregular hiss that seemed to vibrate in the air. I recognized it immediately. It was the typical noise of a television going off, that endless static that, under normal circumstances, only serves to annoy. However, there in that setting, it sounded almost like an electronic whisper, a faceless presence, filling the room with a heavy, purposeless energy. I approached slowly, trying not to make the floor creak beneath my feet, though every step seemed to betray my presence. The sweet smell that had already bothered me in the hallway was now more intense, permeating the air in a suffocating way. The sensation was like entering a place where time had stopped, but not peacefully, as if life had been ripped away, leaving only traces, an invisible mark of what had happened. The crack in the door revealed little, just a fragment of the inner wall and a patch of shadow that moved in time with the flickering of the TV. I had the feeling that the shadow shouldn't be there. My body froze for a few seconds and I felt my heartbeat accelerate abruptly. There was something about the stillness of that room that wasn't normal. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was as if the air itself had a memory. I held my breath before pushing the door open a little further. The hissing sound became clearer, gaining depth, almost as if it were alive. The image on the TV was just a chaotic dance of black and white, but my gaze was drawn to the corner of the screen where, for a split second, there seemed to be something else, like silhouettes trying to form amidst the static. I blinked quickly and the illusion faded, leaving only the interference. The room was plunged into uneven gloom. The heavy, stained curtains let in streaks of outside light that streaked the carpet. Clothes were haphazardly thrown over an armchair, as if someone had stopped mid-arranging them and never returned to finish. The bed, partially unmade, revealed crumpled sheets and a pillow lying on the floor. And then I saw the source of the smell. On the far side of the room, a motionless figure sat on the edge of the bed. The body was tilted slightly forward, as if it had fallen asleep sitting up. But the stiffness of the shoulders and the strange angle of the head made it clear that it was not sleep. The TV cast flashes of light over the pale face, creating a cruel contrast between the coldness of death and the constant vibration of the screen. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain was trying to absorb the scene while simultaneously rejecting the truth before me. It was like standing before a disturbing painting you can't help but stare at, even though you know you shouldn't. The hiss of the TV, previously annoying, now seemed purposeful, as if it were filling the silence with an invisible presence. The door was still half open behind me, and the knowledge that the hallway was just around the corner made every muscle in my body tense, ready to react to any movement. The scene was a silent revelation, a shadowy backstage scene that wasn't part of any official narrative of the place. I knew that crossing that threshold meant more than just entering a room. It was crossing into a territory where logic had little value. As my gaze searched for some detail that might explain what had happened there, a letter, a dropped glass, anything that might give meaning to that moment, I noticed the television's pitch fluctuate. The hissing sound deepened for a few seconds, as if a different sound were trying to emerge beneath it. And at that moment, by pure intuition, I sensed we weren't alone in that room. because every detail I saw there not only told a story, but also hid something that was yet to be revealed, and I was about to realize that it was no coincidence. I pushed the door open slowly, feeling the low creak of its hinges echo through the room, as if every inch it opened ripped away another fragment of silence. The hiss of the TV spread outward, mingling with the thick, heavy air. A chill crept down my spine as my eyes, adjusting to the dim light, found the still figure in the chair. He was leaning to the side, as if the weight of his body had sagged hours, perhaps days ago. His pale skin reflected bluish hues in the flickering light of the television, and there was something unsettling about the fact that his eyes were wide open, fixed on nothing, as if still watching an invisible program. They didn't blink, didn't move. They just stared into space with an expression that wasn't one of fright, nor of peace. It was somewhere between resignation and a final thought that was never completed. From where I stood, I could see the stiffness in his hands, slightly clenched, and the way his shoulders seemed frozen in an uncomfortable posture. There was a strange harmony between his body and the setting, as if the room had been molded to hold this moment, a final scene no one was meant to witness. It was then that my gaze shifted to the side table, leaning against the wall. On it, a yellowed piece of paper was folded in half right in the center, as if it had been placed there on purpose, waiting to be found. It wasn't modern paper, the kind you'd tear from a random notebook. It was thicker with a rough texture, and the edges were slightly burned. In the upper left corner, stains of something that looked like coffee, or maybe dried blood, formed in a regular pattern. My initial impulse was to retreat. Part of me wanted to close the door, get back in the car, and get out of there before anything worse happened. But there was another part, more stubborn and almost obsessed, that wouldn't let me look away. Something about that note called out, as if it contained a hidden truth, a piece of history that would explain what was happening there. With each step I took toward the table, the air felt heavier. It was like walking through an invisible corridor, where each second brought back memories that weren't mine, but insisted on infiltrating my mind. I got close enough to smell the bittersweet scent coming from the body in the chair, mingling with the mustiness of the curtains and the dust accumulated in the carpet. I reached for the paper, hesitating for a moment. The silence was so profound that the sound of my own breathing seemed like an intruder. When I finally touched the note, I noticed it was slightly damp around the edges, as if it had absorbed the humidity of the room for days. I unfolded it carefully, and the words written there in dark, shaky ink hit me like a silent blow. It wasn't a long letter. There were no formal farewells or detailed explanations, just 3 short sentences, spaced by empty lines that seemed to shout louder than the text itself. "If you're reading this, it's already too late. He knows you came. Don't look out the window." My eyes scanned those lines over and over, trying to make sense of them, but the more I read, the less it seemed to belong to a logical world. Who was he, and why not look out the window? The temptation to turn away and check was almost overwhelming, but something in the tone of those words ground me to the ground. I felt the weight of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also the strange sensation that somehow I was meant to be there. The dead man's presence wasn't the only point of tension in that room. There was something else, invisible, but as real as the armchair and the TV blaring in the background. A presence that insinuated itself in the shadows, in the breath of the air, in the gap between each flicker of light. My hands trembled as I refolded the note and tucked it into my pocket. I wasn't sure why I did it, perhaps instinctively, perhaps because a part of me believed those words were more than a warning. They were a key, a fragment of something greater yet to be revealed. The body in the chair remained motionless, but the way the light from the TV danced across his face created the illusion of movement, as if his eyes might at any moment blink or move toward me. And with each passing second, the atmosphere seemed denser, as if the room were slowly closing in on me, forcing me to make a decision: leave immediately or go deeper and find out what had really happened. It was at that moment that I noticed a detail that had escaped me until then. Between the arm of the chair and the body, something glowed faintly, reflecting the intermittent light of the TV. I crouched down, keeping as far away from the pale face as possible, and saw a small ancient brass key with jagged teeth and a mark engraved on the base, the number 9. It didn't correspond to the room number I was in. This discovery changed something inside me. The feeling that I was facing an isolated scene disappeared, replaced by a broader awareness. That room was part of something larger, a network of connected events, perhaps even other places in that motel. And that key was a silent invitation to cross a threshold from which I might not return, because I realized that what lay before me was not just the death of a stranger, but the beginning of a journey to understand something that was hidden behind the walls of that place, something that could forever change the way I saw reality itself. ChatGPT said, "The note still burned in my pocket, as if the ink embedded in the paper carried its own energy. I couldn't tell if it was paranoia or simply the aftermath of the shock, but every detail of the room seemed more alive, more menacing. The air had a different weight, as if it were too dense to breathe without effort. I kept my eyes trained on the motionless body in the chair, but a deeper unease began to take shape. It was as if the atmosphere around me was vibrating with something I couldn't see. My senses were heightened, every sound amplified to the point of discomfort. The hiss of the TV seemed louder, the distant ticking of a clock sounded irregular, and even the rustling of the curtains moving in the draft took on a strange rhythm. Then, without warning, something caught my attention. It wasn't the body, nor the door, but in the right corner of the room, where an oval mirror with a worn wooden frame reflected part of the room. I knew exactly which part he was showing: the opposite wall, the table, and a section of the dingy carpet. But at that moment, something moved in the reflection. A shadow, fleeting and subtle, slid across the surface of the mirror as if it were behind me. My reaction was instinctive. I turned quickly, expecting to find someone there, but the space was empty. No movement, no sound, just the same gloom and the same musty smell. My heart raced. It wasn't just the shadow itself, but the way it moved. It didn't seem to follow the logic of a human body. It was fluid, almost liquid, and it vanished before I could clearly register what it was. Still, my mind tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was the reflection of a car passing outside, a beam of light distorting on the glass. But there was no light coming from outside. Outside, the night was pitch black, and the heavy curtains blocked any possibility of reflection. I stood motionless, staring into the mirror as if it were a portal. The frame, once worn with age, now seemed to pulse faintly in the flickering light of the TV. I approached, but with each step, I felt a strange resistance, as if something in the air was trying to convince me to stop. Looking into that reflection felt like I was being stared back at, and then I noticed the detail that chilled my blood. In the mirror, the body in the chair wasn't in exactly the same position as in reality. It was almost imperceptible, but the tilt of his head seemed different, the angle of his eyes slightly altered. In the reflection, he wasn't staring into space. He was looking directly at me. I pulled away suddenly, the note in my pocket feeling heavier. I was no longer sure if the warning about "don't look out the window" was the only one I should follow. Perhaps there were other invisible boundaries, and I had already crossed one of them. My breathing was ragged, and a cold sweat was beginning to form on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched didn't diminish. On the contrary, it grew stronger by the second. It was as if the shadow I'd seen hadn't disappeared, but merely shifted position, finding a new spot to watch me unnoticed. I tried to tear my gaze away from the mirror, but it was like fighting a magnet. A part of me wanted to convince myself it was all just my imagination, that the weight of the scene, the body, the note, the key in my pocket, was distorting my perception. But there was something deeper, more primal, telling me it wasn't my imagination. I began to walk slowly around the room, looking for another angle that would allow me to see the mirror without standing directly in front of it. The carpet muffled my footsteps, and I could hear, almost imperceptibly, the sound of something dragging very slowly, but not in the physical world. It was like a muffled noise coming from within the wall itself, or worse, from within the mirror. When I looked back at the reflection, I realized the shadow was gone, but where it had once moved, there was now a darker spot, almost like a blur on the surface, which seemed to subtly change shape. My fingers itched to touch the glass, to check if it was just dirt or an imperfection. However, a deep instinct prevented me. I touched only the frame, and the wood was cold, colder than it should be for an object inside a closed room. It was at that moment that something happened. For a brief moment, the TV's reflection in the mirror faded, even though, in reality, it continued to blare behind me. And in that space of darkness, I saw what appeared to be a face. It wasn't that of the man in the armchair. It was another, pale, with sunken eyes, and an expression that mixed curiosity and hunger. I took a step back, but the reflection returned to normal as if nothing had happened. The TV reappeared, The body resumed its original position, and the shadow vanished. But inside me, something had changed. I knew I wasn't alone there. The urge to leave that room was so immediate, I didn't even think twice. I backed away from the mirror like someone recoiling from a flame, and with each step, I felt as if the floor were tilting slightly, almost pushing me out. The presence in the room seemed to have grown, as if the dense air were taking shape behind me. I didn't look back, not out of courage but out of sheer fear of what I might see. The door seemed farther away than it actually was, and the cold handle nearly slipped from my hand as I tried to turn it. For a second, I felt like it wouldn't budge, but with a sharp click, the lock gave way. The hallway swallowed me in a suffocating silence. The hiss of the TV faded, but I didn't take any relief with me. On the contrary, there was something about that emptiness that made each step heavier. I ran. I didn't walk. I ran. The sound of my footsteps echoed strangely, as if the narrow walls distorted time and space. Each door I passed seemed identical to the last, and for a moment I feared I was stuck in a loop. But a few meters ahead, the small reception area appeared in the gloom. My relief lasted only long enough to realize the impossible. The front door, which hours earlier had swung open without difficulty, was now locked with a thick chain and a rusty padlock that hadn't been there before. I pulled, shook, and pushed. The metal vibrated but didn't budge. My breathing was already rapid, and I felt cold sweat running down my back. I looked around for the attendant, the thin, bald man who had given me the key earlier, but there was no sign of him. Not an abandoned coffee cup, not the sound of the radio that had been playing when I arrived. Just silence. Then I approached the window, still hoping to see some movement outside. The sight hit me like a punch. The parking lot, previously nearly empty but with my car parked near the entrance, was now completely deserted. No vehicles, no tire tracks, just the damp asphalt reflecting the dim light from the street lamp. And most disturbingly, the road beyond the parking lot seemed darker than usual, as if the darkness were heavy, swallowing the horizon. My heart pounded in my chest. A twisted logic began to form. Either my car was gone, or someone had taken it, or it had never been there. But it didn't make sense. I remembered the sound of the door closing, the sound of the engine idling, the cold touch of the steering wheel before I got out. All of this was too real to be an illusion. A cold wind blew through the reception area, coming from nowhere. It was impossible because all the doors and windows were closed. Even so, I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end, and the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. It was no longer just the perception of being alone in a strange place. It was the certainty that something was studying me, waiting for my next decision. I tried calling someone, but my cell phone, which had previously had signal, now only showed no service. I clutched the phone in my hand, as if that would solve anything. It was then that I noticed something unsettling on the reception desk. An open ledger, its yellowed pages filled with handwritten names, all dated back years, decades. Some names were crossed out with ink so dark it looked like they had been engraved on the page. I ran my finger over one of them and felt the roughness as if the ink were still fresh. But what made me recoil was finding, on the last completed page, my own signature. And below it, the date. It wasn't today's. It was from 3 days ago. My mind tried to grasp at any logical explanation. Mistake, coincidence, someone copying my handwriting. But the handwriting, the way the pen had pressed against the paper, was identical to mine. The air in the reception area grew, heavier, as if something there knew I'd noticed. Suddenly, a low sound, almost a whisper, came from behind the counter. It wasn't a clear voice, but something that seemed to scratch the surface of language, as if trying to imitate human words. I leaned forward hesitantly and realized it was coming from a small hallway leading into the building. The darkness inside was so dense that not even the dim light from the reception desk could penetrate. I knew I needed to get out of there, but I also knew that every second lost could trap me even more deeply in this place. I touched the padlock again, almost desperately, and felt that it was colder than before, cold enough that my skin stung from the contact. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because what was happening there wasn't just a matter of locked doors or a missing car. It was as if I'd crossed an invisible threshold, and that motel was slowly swallowing me up, rewriting my presence in the world in ways I didn't yet understand. Comment there. That makes sense to me. My eyes fluttered open as if glued shut during a deep, heavy sleep. The first thing I noticed was the familiar smell of fuel and stale fried food. the kind of aroma that mingles in the air of any highway gas station. The distant hum of a refrigerator and the rustle of a plastic flag hanging in the wind signaled that I was far from the suffocating silence of the motel. I looked up and realized I was in the driver's seat. The steering wheel, under my hands the worn seat, the dashboard illuminated by the dim light of the fuel gauge hovering near the red. Everything was as usual, except for the fact that I had no idea how I'd gotten there. Outside, a simple gas station sat on a secluded lot, surrounded only by the darkness of dawn. The digital clock on the dashboard read 4:17 a.m., but the last thing I remembered was the cold padlock on the reception door, the book with my name written on it, and that unbearable feeling of being watched. Between then and now, a hole, a complete void in my memory, as if someone had ripped entire pages from a book. I picked up my phone, my hands still shaking. The screen flashed, revealing something that left me even more confused. The app showed that the ride had been canceled, with no explanation. There were no messages from the passenger, no mid-ride cancellation alerts, just the cold, dry message, "Ride canceled by requester." My first reaction was to try calling someone, a friend, anyone who would listen and tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But before I even opened my contact list, I noticed something strange in the corner of my screen. The last call I'd made, at 2:03 a.m., was registered as being from my own number, and it had lasted exactly 7 minutes and 29 seconds. The thought of having talked to myself or of someone using my phone to do so made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, trying to find some semblance of rationality in it, but it was like trying to catch smoke. The feeling of displacement, of being in a safe place yet completely vulnerable, was almost physical. It was then that I noticed another disturbing detail. On the passenger seat was a small keychain with a metal tag. Engraved on it was a number, room 6, the same room where I had left the passenger's body, motionless, with that pallor of someone no longer belonging to this world. I hadn't brought it with me. I couldn't have. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment I swore I saw something move in the back seat. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just my own backpack, thrown haphazardly, as if someone had rummaged through it. I touched the zipper and realized it was open, but the contents seemed intact, at least at first glance. As I tried to piece together the logic of what had happened, a gas station attendant, a man in a worn cap and plaid shirt, tapped lightly on the window. I rolled down the window and he looked me up and down, with an expression as if he was about to say something but decided against it at the last second. "Are you okay?" he asked hesitantly. "I think so," I replied without much conviction. "How long ago did I get here?" He frowned, as if the question didn't make sense. "You were already there when I started my shift, and that was at 11 at night." The information fell on me like a crushing weight. I hadn't been at the motel until just before I woke up. Somehow, I'd been standing at that gas station for hours that simply didn't exist in my memory. The employee walked away slowly, still watching me strangely. I started the car, not because I knew where I was going, but because standing there, motionless, was unbearable. As I sped onto the highway, I noticed in the rearview mirror that the man continued to stare at me, motionless, until the darkness swallowed him. The road before me seemed longer and quieter than it should have been. No other cars passed, not even in the opposite direction. Just the constant sound of tires on asphalt and every now and then a creaking sound from inside the car, as if something were settling or shifting. With every mile, the image of the room, the mirror, the book, and that padlock returned more strongly. It wasn't just a memory of a strange place. It was as if part of me had stayed there, and somehow, that part was still watching me. Sometimes I think that night could very well have been just a nightmare, the kind that sticks to your skin and mind for days, making you question whether the mind is truly capable of creating something so real. But every time I pass that road, even during the day, with the sun high and the normal flow of trucks and cars, something changes in the air. The smell returns. It's not strong, it's not constant, but it emerges like an olfactory memory I didn't ask for. A mix of damp wood, ancient dust, and something undefined, something reminiscent of the bedroom. It's not just the smell. It's the way my fingers involuntarily tighten on the steering wheel, as if trying to hold on tight amid a feeling that something is about to happen again. I've tried to convince myself that it's just my mind playing tricks, that there's nothing special about that strip of asphalt. but it's impossible to ignore the chill that creeps up my spine in exactly the same spot, kilometer after kilometer. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that certain experiences aren't linear. They don't end. When you physically move away from the place or situation, they're like echoes that find ways to repeat themselves, even far from their source. Perhaps these are what we call invisible marks, those that don't leave a scar on the skin, but shape the way you see the world. I've tried to rationalize. I researched memory lapses, sleepwalking, even time loss phenomena reported by drivers. Some articles spoke of extreme fatigue, others of rare neurological events, but none of them explained the detail. Of the room 6 keychain on the seat next to me, none talked about how smell could cross the barrier of time and find me again. Weeks later, as the days passed, I realized there was something more uncomfortable than fear: curiosity. It's as if there was a part of me, hidden deep down, that wanted to go back there just to understand, just to confirm whether everything had happened or if I was trapped in an illusion. But this kind of decision is treacherous, because there's a difference between wanting to know the truth and being ready to receive it. And deep down, I feared that finding out would mean I couldn't return to what I call normal. I remember a friend once telling me that certain roads don't just lead to physical places, but to versions of ourselves we might be trying to avoid. I think he was right, because since that night, I've realized my relationship with the idea of a safe place has changed. Shelter isn't always an enclosed space, nor is the road always a single path. Sometimes they're just settings for something already written, and we are the characters who will live, whether we like it or not, what the script demands. And each time the memory returns, whether through a smell, a similar sound, or the sight of an isolated roadside motel, something inside me awakens. It's not just fear or discomfort, it's as if part of that place is still with me, or worse, as if I'm still partially there. If you've made it this far, I think you already know. This kind of story isn't just about fear. It's about that strange feeling that the road holds secrets that not everyone is ready to hear. And that's why it's worth subscribing, so you don't miss the next story, which features another one of those encounters that only those who live by the road can understand. Leave a like if this connection we created resonated with you, because that's what keeps these stories alive here. And comment, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know you've made this journey with me. Now, if you want to continue this spirit and discover another motel that hides an even more disturbing secret, just continue to the next video. I'll see you there.